Welcome to the Kentucky History Channel, where we strive to bring you all the Kentucky history content you want and you deserve. Kentucky is a part of all of us, and we plan on covering all the history we can, from Pike County to Fulton County, from Louisville to Harlan. Here on our YouTube channel, you can find many videos dedicated to different events, people, governors, and places in Kentucky. There's something for everybody. While you're here, if you like the channel, hit the subscribe button and the notification button so you get notified anytime new Kentucky history is available. And if you want to support the channel, we have a Patreon page as well, or patreon.com/kyhistorypod. You've probably heard about Daniel Boone, but what about the rest of the frontiersmen who came to Kentucky and settled? That's what we want to bring to the Kentucky History Channel. The stories of the untold, the stories of those forgotten. One thing to expect on our channel is great Kentucky content. Some stories that you've never heard of. The Night Riders, who began in western Kentucky. Bloody Monday, the riots in Louisville. The assassination of Governor Goebel, the only governor ever assassinated in the United States. Stories from all over Kentucky, stories that are unforgettable once you've heard them. You can find out who counties in Kentucky are named after and how your county got started. From beginning to end, we plan to document every county in Kentucky, all 120. Reach out to us on all of our social media platforms. Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and also leave a comment on one of our YouTube videos. You can also check out our podcast episodes. You can subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and many more. Welcome back to the Kentucky History Podcast. I'm your host, Jameson Cable, and with me is David Kirkpatrick. How you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing good. We're here recording some good Kentucky history. Got a good topic here. George Rogers Clark, GRC.
That's right.
One of the I'll say there's few high schools that go by their full county name. You know, you hear Clark County, but they all George Rogers Clark. That's
right.
That's the school. You know. Benjamin Lincoln is not what people from Lincoln County say.
Well, same with us. Hugh Mercer, George Washington. It's just they imply that you know it, but yeah.
Yeah. I kind of wonder like what really got that started. I kind of think it's pretty cool. It's a pretty traditional kind of thing.
Yep.
I've heard people talk about Joshua Bell County.
Right.
Going like that and so forth. But anyway, that's simple side county talk, I guess. But George Rogers Clark, it is. It's pretty interesting. George Rogers Clark, though, a very important frontiersman. And in a sense, I mean, we're going to label them a frontiersman because we've been talking about Squire Boone, Daniel Boone, Simon Kenton, Benjamin Logan, all those James Harrod, all those big early frontiersmen that most people know about most of them, but a few not as much. But George Rogers Clark is one that's probably not as much, I would say. Not as many people know.
Oh yeah, and that's surprising because George Rogers Clark. If you go back 100 years or so, in the 1920s or 30s, there are all kinds of books written about Clark, and he's extremely popular. And I don't know why that period of time seemed to latch on to him. But you talk about people losing, kind of their place in the public eye. He has probably done that faster than most, and it's sort of an enigma to explain why.
Yeah, and even to mention, they call George Rogers Clark High School. That's what they call it. But yet, I would bet many people at that high school or in that county may not know as much about George Rogers Clark as any other county would know about their person that they're named after.
Right.
But important person. I say, if we're going to label him a frontiersman, but he's a military man too. That might be more what he's known for as well. I guess I'm saying he's not the frontiersman type, as in Daniel Boone, Simon Kenton. His role was a bit different.
Yes.
Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think so. When you think of those guys, you have to ask what they had in their hands. Is it a divining rod and they're looking for water? Is it an axe and you're clearing the wilderness road? George Rogers Clark was here, but he's wielding a sword, and that's his entire reason for being in Kentucky. And even though his life, he goes backwards and forwards, which we'll talk about, from Kentucky to Ohio and places like that. But his purpose for being here is to defend the frontier, and he's a military guy 100%.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, well, we'll kind of get going with, I guess, the basis of it, and we'll elaborate more as we go. He was born November 19th, 1752, to John and Ann Rogers Clark in Monticello, Albemarle County.
Yep.
I don't know if I'm saying that right, Virginia. But like most of the frontiersmen and early settlers, they came from Virginia. George Rogers, pretty much the same thing. He was taught by Donald Robertson, who's kind of a well-known educator, and then also George Mason, which is a pretty big name to be like, hey, taught by George Mason. But he was more of a mentor in that sense, not in the classroom, I guess is the best way to say it. But that I guess I want to say kind of standard time period life for his youth. But when he, as he got older, when he turned 20 years old, he purchased Euclid's Elements and surveying equipment, and therefore that began his surveying practice.
Right. He comes from an interesting family too. You mentioned those early days in his life, because they have, like we've talked about with so many other people, sort of this brush with greatness, right? He's in Albemarle County, so you're neighbors with Thomas Jefferson and George, not George Madison, James Madison. George Madison's Kentuckian. James Madison. You're near all these people, and if I'm not mistaken, I think even some of his education, he had a very general education, nothing special, but I think he, was at least in similar circles with some of those guys initially, and the family. He never quite achieves that level of prominence that they do. But you're right. He takes up the trade that made so many other people famous. I mean, if you're George Washington, you've got surveying as the key to your success. And I think he was aiming for that too.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And I mean, a lot of people probably don't realize that George Washington surveyed as well. There in his earlier life, I guess what you would say. Yeah. Clark, I guess you could say, brushing elbows with kind of the big wigs, but he's most known for his military career, and that by far is the biggest things he has success in, and so forth. And that's kind of where I guess his name takes off. He kind of moves up the ranks. He fights in many wars, and some of these wars I'm not as familiar with, but he fought in the Creseps War?
I think you're saying it right. Yeah.
Do you know anything about that war? Because I don't.
I've read bits and pieces here and there on Wikipedia and places, but no, I'm not as familiar with that one. I know he has a lot of Indian wars after the Revolution. He's plays a prominent role in subduing the tribes in Ohio and Indiana. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll leave everybody else. You all can Google and find out about the Creseps War, because I don't know much about it at all. But he is a captain of the Pittsburgh militia during Lord Dunmore's War, which was a pretty big event that took place. And George Washington was involved in that as well. And is that's the one where George Washington was? They attacked a French fort, wasn't it? And they got beat.
Well, Dunmore's War is in 1774, and that's the Battle of Point Pleasant. But he is a part of that, and you're right, because he becomes a member of the militia at, I think, age 19 in 1771, and I mean, He hits the ground running.
Yeah. Pretty. Well, I mean, a lot of the youth. I was about to say that got an early start, but a lot of people joined up pretty early in their lives. The people that you didn't have a lot of late bloomers that joined the military. I guess would be the way to say it. But he in 1775 he does help survey and plan the community of Leesburg, which is now part of Frankfort, Kentucky, which is pretty cool. His surveying skills paid off, and he contributed, which is pretty early. Pretty. I guess I was his pretty early contribution to Kentucky. I guess would be the way to go with it. But he goes to Williamsburg, Virginia, as a delegate from Harrodsburg, to help raise support the creation of Kentucky County, which was at the time Fincastle County, Virginia, and which their biggest thing was Native American attacks. That was what they needed. Do we know, or like exactly? Because if you think about this, Herod came in 74.
Mm-hmm.
Logan and Boone were in 75, right behind him. Was Clark? How far behind was Clark? Did he come over? Is there a record of that? Do we know? 75. He's surveying Leesburg, so that's pretty much right on the tails. But
yeah, he makes his first foray into Kentucky as a surveyor is 72. So he's in and out, backwards and forwards. And like you mentioned, he's surveying. I want to say it's early 76 when he gets sent in the military capacity. Was captain of the Kentucky County militia. Because like you say, in the summer of that year, he's on his way back to Virginia. And he's representing the settlers at Harrodsburg because for two things. Number one, the Indian attacks, like you mentioned, they really need supplies, but also the whole Transylvania debacle. With John Gabriel Jones, they'd gone back, and one reason they were pushing for Kentucky County to be established is you want Virginia to make it abundantly clear that this land belongs to them and not Transylvania. Okay. So I kind of feel like if you're sending someone back like that, you have to have some faith in them, So I don't think you walked in one day and they dispatched him the next day. So yeah, he was there from pretty early on. He less than 24 months after Kentucky's first settlement, he's here. So we'll say it that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a pretty good way to put it. The next little bit though, we're talking about 1776. Pretty big important date because the Revolutionary War is all beginning and all these things start happening, and pretty much his wish is granted. Kentucky County is formed, and he is pretty much made the leader of the militia of Kentucky County. He comes back to Kentucky with gunpowder, supplies. Mainly, the main objective is to defend against the Native American attacks and possibly other foes. And a lot of people, made a video about this, about Kentucky's involvement in the Revolutionary War, because a lot of people don't even realize any of this.
Yeah,
there was a lot going on, a whole bunch going on, and Clark's sole purpose was to prevent these things, or to prevent these events from getting out of hand, or I guess causing any bad trouble for the revolution. And
right.
And you got a mountain in between you, so that's a good thing. It's a positive. But so a lot of things going on. Where would we say Clark's? Because I'm trying to think of you had the siege on Boonesboro, you had the siege on Harrod, and so forth. But Clark's involvement mainly is going on during up at Corn Island and stuff. I don't know. Was he at any of the forts when they were under siege? I can't think of a time that he was.
He is. I've been waiting for the chance to say this because, being from Harrisburg. Harrisburg's the county seat of Kentucky County. So most of Clark's dealings are out of Fort Harrod. And he travels extensively. He's not lazy at all. So he's all over the place as far as issuing commands and things. But he is, I want to say he's there when Fort Herod, it's not so much attacked as it is besieged on and off in 1777. I think Clark was there for that. But yeah, he's basing his time out of that. And when he goes to Virginia in 1776, one of the things they bring back, you mentioned the supplies, was 500 pounds of gunpowder. And that was a whole debacle in itself because it's ordered, sent, to Fort Pitt so you can float it down the Ohio. And he sends word to Kentucky that you need to send boats up to pick it up. And the word never makes it, and no boats show up. So now they've got to get it down the Ohio. They've got to get it to Harrodsburg. They break it into smaller, chunks, a barrel here and a barrel there, and they hide it and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, by the time the Bloody Sevens rolls around, the really difficult times, he's had a year and a half of pretty difficult goings-ons. And in Harrodsburg, they still remember that part of his career in January of each year because they have what they call the powder run. They have guys who dress up in the period uniform, and usually they'll carry a powder keg or something, and they march through town to the fort as representative of that. I would love to say, being the dedicated individual to history that I am, that I've attended that, but it's really cold in January in Harrodsburg. So I've not been brave enough to go out and do it, but they do remember that.
Yeah. Well, I understand. January is a cold month. Yeah, and so the whole point or the whole fear of all this in the Kentucky county of Virginia is that the British are going to come in and take over these settlements, and then they'll have an easy access to fight on the Western Front as well against the colonists. I mean, would it have changed things? I don't know. That's a debatable thing,
right?
Because again, they had to cross a mountain. But that would put more pressure. You'd have a southern front, a northern front, and then a western attack as well. So that's up for what ifs, all that kind of stuff. But the British, were supplying and supporting the Native Americans to attack. And in some cases, well, and especially the sieges that took place, the British soldiers were on hand. Not necessarily the Native Americans vastly outnumbered the British that were there in all circumstances. But that's what these sieges were all about, was putting pressure on the frontiersmen and so forth. And Clark's whole purpose was to prevent this from getting out of hand and so forth. So that gets us to about, 1778, whenever he built a small post on Corn Island, on the falls of the Ohio. Corn Island, I always bring this up, is such a weird name. Was it named because they were making corn on there, because they were settlers, or was it a decoy that Clark came up with to say, hey, this is just a settlement post. It's not a military post, so we're going to call it Corn Island so nobody gets any, wild ideas. Or instead of some of the fort names I've always heard, Fort Defiance. There's another one that it's like, could you come up with a better name? He didn't he didn't name it Fort Aggression, or anything like that.
That's
that
true.
Would have been an obvious.
You convey the thought you want to convey, so. He was on a secret mission when he got there, and of course you can't go excavate it because it's gone. So the mystery remains. But
So yeah, pretty good, but so back to the point. The Corn Island was basically the outpost for the planned invasion, invasion might not be a correct word, but attack plan, campaign. The campaign probably the best way to say it. The campaign into the Illinois territory to kind of push back on these Native American attacks, and that's kind of the way it goes. He marches to Kaskaskia.
Right.
Pronounce that one right. I'm not the best with some of the native names, but anyway.
Struggle to, yeah.
Yeah. He rolled in there July 4th, captured the village without losing anybody in his company, which is pretty good. The following winter, he divided his men, and they formed a surprise attack against Henry Hamilton, who's in Vincennes. And just so people know, British Lieutenant Governor Henry Hamilton was the person in charge of the Illinois Territory and so forth.
Right.
And Hamilton is actually surrenders and then transported back through Kentucky and actually stayed at Fort Logan for a time, and this kind of bolstered his career. Which that's a brief summary. Anything else to go with that right off?
I think you've summed it up well. The thing about that, I don't feel like Clark gets enough credit these days like he used to, because if you read like modern writings about it, you get the impression that, well, he got some guys together, they marched into the woods, they take a few forts, and the British end up taking one or two of them back because Vincennes, ends up back in British hands. But if you really look at what he accomplished, they've come through 1777, and it's been a difficult year. I mean, there are settlers being killed on a daily basis. And like you said, Clark is determined he's got to relieve the pressure somehow. And, the British have Detroit, and they're up there in Michigan, in that area, because now you control the Mississippi. I mean, you can come down, you can harass American settlements anywhere as you want. And so Clark has the idea, if we can neutralize some of those forts and some of those strongholds the British have along the Mississippi River in Illinois and moving northward. And I think in his own mind, in a perfect world, he's going to take Detroit. They know it's a long shot, but that would be ideal. And so, yeah, that's the goal. And the fact that he dispatches spies, he sends 2 spies from Harrodsburg. And I used to know their names. One of the last names was Lynn, Linn, and I forget the other one. And they were supposed to be going on a trip to New Orleans. And what they're really doing is spying out British forces along the Mississippi. And then he has a Jesuit priest, is it at Vincennes or one of those places, that's feeding him information from the former French settlers that were now under the British flag. So he pulls it off really, really well, because the wilderness is a big place, but there are a lot of native warriors, and it's really easy to get seen. So the fact that they did what they did, it's pretty incredible.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing that, really kind of bolsters his reputation is like the Native Americans become very fearful of Clark. He gets up on the level of like Simon Kenton. They really had great respect for Simon Kenton, to the point they thought he was kind of protected by their god. To hurt Simon Kenton would be a terrible something against their god. So
Right.
but Clark he was probably not as notable as Simon Kent to the Native Americans. But after this attack, after he was so quick and able to take over these villages and so forth, they became very fearful of him. And if they got caught wind that he was leading an attack or so forth, they just about would go ahead and just abandon the village or so forth, which we'll see here in a little bit. And so as things go on. Well, I guess we go and talk about it now. I guess because it pretty much goes on to the to other things. He mounts up an attack on the Shawnee village that was very important. I think Chickamauga. Did I say that right?
Yeah, we'll go with it. I won't do any better.
So and he, which is this one would have been around Springfield, Ohio. But they heard that Clark was coming, and they abandoned the city before he even arrived. So while there, though, Clark goes ahead and just burns all the supplies and stuff, and kind of makes it hard on them that way. You could say act of cruelty, but in a time of war, what else do you expect, really? Again, his goal was to push back to try and have keep the attacks from coming on. 1782, he gets a big promotion, brigadier general, which he's been being promoted this whole time. But that's a pretty that's getting up there.
Oh yeah, from captain in 1774 to brigadier general. A few years later, that's not terrible.
Yeah. So he leads another battle against the Shawnee. I'm gonna pause right here. I don't think he was at Blue Licks, was he?
No, he gets reprimanded severely for it because it's technically under his
That's
command, but
right.
yeah, he's not there.
Yeah. Yeah. So, well, I'll rephrase that because I read that and I was like, I don't think he was that. But anyway,
Right.
so during this time too, of course, 1782 ish, though Yorktown, the main British forces have surrendered, but there's still um, action going on. I guess if you want to say battle still going on, fighting still ensuing, and one of those battles will be the Battle of Blue Licks in central Kentucky, what's now Robertson County,
Right.
and the Shawnee. Well, there's a few things. I think it's um, they take they take Bryan Station. What we talked about? We talked about that a while back. They
Yeah.
surround Bryan Station, and then those people flee, or the natives flee, and pretty much they lead them into a trap, which and they it's a pretty heavy loss for the Kentuckians in that battle. Clark was not there at all, but he did get in trouble for it because again,
The
he's
buck
in
stops
charge.
here. Yep.
That's right. He's in charge of defending Kentucky, and things did not. That was not a success. Um,
And really
so
unfairly
yeah,
in that, I mean, the problem
yeah,
there late at the regimental level, the captains of the militia should have said, "Hey, this is a dumb idea. We're not going to do this. It's clearly an ambush." And the fact that things played out the way they did, I mean, I always felt like he got a raw deal because of that.
yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, I think so too. I mean, I think sure, McGrary, he's a bit of a hothead, and Boone even was like, "Hey guys, we shouldn't do this. Let's wait for Benjamin Logan." And but no, they had to go ahead and go. Had to you know strike while they were hot, and it did not go the way they wanted.
Right.
Yeah. Um, so yeah, the in 1783, the Revolutionary War pretty much ends. Um, then Virginia, of course, owes Clark payment for his service. Instead of giving him the $20,000 in money, they give him 18,049 acres of land, which
Right.
sounds. I mean, that's a lot of land. I mean, that's a lot of land. I mean, how could you go wrong? But that's the way they paid about all of them. They paid them all with land. Um,
And if you had a road to
um,
get to it, or you knew settlers were coming the next day or something, it's not a bad
yeah,
deal. But
yeah.
you're land rich but money poor because until there are people who want to buy that, you're stuck.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, like, think about you got 18,000 acres of land in Western Kentucky or even Central Kentucky at the time. It's not really there's not really a lot of people coming at the moment. They do come, but if you're in a situation that you're like, I don't have no money though, because Clark pretty much he's indebted and he uses it to pay off his soldiers.
Yeah.
So I mean, he gets another bad kind of act there. It doesn't go in his favor too well.
The only
On
other
top of
thing
all
is
that, yeah. Go ahead.
the only other thing he's got going for him at the time is in 1783 he ends up being the principal surveyor for land bounties in the area. So you've got a government position, but you're making next to nothing on it. So there's a little bit coming in, but yeah, he's getting up the creek without a paddle.
Yep. Yep. Um, Clark was given the rights to build a grist mill around Clarksville, Indiana. Interesting name.
Yeah.
Uh, but the rights were withdrawn after Clark took supplies and boats from Spanish merchants, and rumors circulated around about big Spanish conspiracy. So Virginia Governor Randolph acted by taking back Clark's right, but Clark was eventually innocent of any charges of catering to this conspiracy, I guess. But again, another kind of I forgot the all this being said, Clark did have a bit of a drinking problem.
Yeah.
He did.
There are times in American history where that if they couldn't have anything else to say about you, they threw that out. And you wonder whether it was true or not. But in Clark's case, he really did. Especially as he got older, he had a problem with alcohol.
Yeah, and I mean, if you think about it, so many battles and so forth. There's a good chance PTSD, those sorts of things. I
Yeah.
mean, he never married. He didn't have any kids.
Right.
You know, you could very well understand how that could, how he could go down that path, I guess, to say it that way. Um, um, Clark was offered a military commission from France to attack New Orleans, but
Right.
in 1798, Clark was told, "No, no, no," by the U.S. He would either have to resign that position or be arrested. Which
Yeah.
the
That's
Confederate.
so really. It's poor. It's poor judgment on Clark's part because the guy who offers it to him is named Genet, and he's the French ambassador who has completely ruined his reputation on the East Coast. Like he's gone to visit George Washington. He demands America's help in the war France was fighting with the British, and when he doesn't get it, he throws a temper tantrum and tells off the president of the United States. And he says, "Well, I'll take it straight to the people." So this guy's reputation is already ruined by the time he gets to
Mhm.
Kentucky, and Clark should have known better. But it
Yeah.
shows that Kentucky is. People thought of this as a very different place where it's just
Mhm.
detached enough. Maybe you could get the support.
Yeah, yeah, and again, you're looking at Clark here, who's got a lot of stuff going on. I mean, things are uh, not perfect in many different ways, and he is a military kind of minded man. Um, Maybe he just wanted to get back out there, get back into it. You know, uh, at this time, I mean, 1798, Native American presence in Kentucky was really dying down. Not much at all.
Yeah,
Now, if you move up to say Ohio and I guess maybe Central Ohio, Central Indiana, you know, those grounds were still pretty active. As
right.
far as if you think about Shawnee and other Native American tribes still being pretty present and fighting for the land, to say it that way. Um, so yeah, Clark kind of gets another um, bad notch, I guess, bad notch on his belt there. If you want to go that way. In 1805, Clark's body and mind are probably getting, well. I shouldn't say mind, but are getting beat up. He's had a kind of a rough military life. In 1809, he has a stroke. Um, you know, I think he recovered to an extent, but he wasn't all completely physically recovered, and he has a concussion well, he falls and has a concussion,
Right.
and kind of gets his leg caught on the fireplace, which is
Yeah.
not good. Um, so
Yeah. Severe burns there, and they have to amputate part of that, I think. And you
yep,
know, if you're someone who's that active, that is just another blow to who you are as an individual, which is all that Clark had left at this point. As you said, he has no
mhm,
family. Well, he's got siblings and things, but as far as wife and children, he doesn't have that social network or that support network. So yeah, but that's when he actually has to rely on someone for the first time, and that brings him out of Ohio back to Kentucky.
yep, and yeah, I don't think I said it all that he moved or that he moved, but yeah, he moves back to Louisville, a place called Locust Grove with his sister, and he pretty much lives there. In 1813, he has another stroke, which leaves him paralyzed, and then he has a third stroke in 1818. Which, if you think about that, I mean, that's 5 years that he lived after being paralyzed, basically. I mean,
Right.
and he ends up dying on February 13th, 1818, from his third stroke. But I don't know, but how mentally was he available during those last 5 years? Do you know?
Yeah, that's a good question. I know that if you go to Locust Grove now, because it's a park, you can go up and tour the house, and they can show you the room he was in. You get the impression that he was non-responsive is not the word, but he's certainly immobile. And yeah, I don't know. I think there was something missing after that in his
Yeah,
personality.
yeah. One thing I want to back up and say again, back during the Revolutionary War time, because we all brought up that the Native Americans were kind of fearful of them. They were planning another invasion of Kentucky with General Byrd, a British general. I don't think he might have been a captain. But like they were beginning the plans, and then they heard that Clark was about to have another invasion or another campaign into Illinois territory, and they like completely like shut down. Like, whoa, let's wait. And they
Yeah.
were like, no, we waited. And then after they got wind that Clark wasn't doing anything, then they came to into Kentucky with a cannon actually. But that's another story another time. But just that reputation, he had a big reputation.
He did, and one of the things, and this is it's hard to swallow from modern ears, I think, but it's a different time. When they take Vincennes, or they're trying to take Vincennes, Clark has not very many men, 170 some men under his command. You don't have a lot of supplies, and the British are going to be on their way from Detroit if you linger too long. So you have to win, and you have to win now. And so they bring out some captured warriors and force them to kneel down in front of the fort. And it's psychological warfare in a sense. You have to intimidate the people in the fort, and they slowly tomahawk these individuals, within sight of people in the fort. And it's incredibly bloody and very dark to think about, but it worked. The fort surrendered, and I think that contributed a lot to that reputation that he held later on. And it's a very different kind of reputation than you see back east. It's funny because so many of the traditional people you think of as being Revolutionary War heroes, they kind of want to sweep some of the Western guys under the rug, like Mad Anthony Wayne. Mad as in crazy. That's probably not the name you want to attribute to him, but you don't hear about him, and he did very important things during the Revolution. And he and Clark are kind of in the same boat. They don't want to talk about him too much because they want to present this very genteel, very formal style, army. And that's just not how it played out in the West.
No, it was a different enemy. In all honesty, it was a different a battle in more ways than one. I mean, it was well, you talk about the Revolutionary War side of it. On the east side, you had the Patriots or the Continental Army lining up, the British lining up, and firing, doing that typical formal warfare.
Right.
But what ended up winning in the end was doing the unconventional stuff, but then on the other side of the west side, the western part of the war, it was always unconventional, and it was never formal in any sense,
Right.
So yeah, that's all I got on Clark. I feel like that was brief, but we'll wrap it up. If you got anything else you can think of.
No, just it's a shame that his reputation has dwindled so much because he played a big role, but I think the alcoholism and the missteps with France and Spain, they tarnished that over time. Yeah. But there's no discounting his contributions to American history.
Yeah, and I mean, it's kind of one of those things. He had a few mishaps here and there, and that sometimes is all it takes to kind of tarnish your legacy, I guess.
And the government does finally pay his family back after he's dead. They give $30,000 to his estate, which didn't help him any. And I think they finally made a final payment in like 1913 or something. I mean, it's really late.
Wow.
So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he again, his accomplishments in Kentucky swept under the rug as far as how important they were, because I mean, in many cases helped, stabilize Kentucky as far as a sense of getting people able to come in here and settle and having a network, I guess, would be the best way to help protect the settlers that were coming in and fight off against the Native Americans and so forth. And go ahead.
We talked about the Blue Licks. Yeah, it's a defeat, but the fact that people from Logan Station and Harrodsburg and all these guys made it on time is really a testimony to Clark, because he was in charge of organizing the militia, making sure they were armed, making sure they were responsive. So, yeah.
Yeah, and that's the only recognized, I think, battle of the Revolutionary War um, at Blue Lick State Park.
Right.
Which you can go visit that stuff, and I think they have reenactments there too. Um, so go check that out at some point. But Clark wasn't there, but you can still check it out.
That's a neat
But
place.
yeah, yeah. Anyway, that pretty much sums it all up, I guess. I don't have much else to add. He did definitely contribute to Kentucky, and is very much a important figure. Uh, you know, uh, like many historical figures, has has a little blood on his hands. But
Right.
most of them do. Most of them
Yep.
do, and uh, that's just what it is. Anything else?
I think that wraps it up.
All right. Well, we will stop right there. We'll continue on talking about some frontiersmen and all that good stuff here soon, and eventually we'll talk about some other stuff, I guess. So, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Take care.
Welcome to the Kentucky History Channel, where we strive to bring you all the Kentucky history content you want and you deserve. Kentucky is a part of all of us, and we plan on covering all the history we can, from Pike County to Fulton County, from Louisville to Harlan. Here on our YouTube channel, you can find many videos dedicated to different events, people, governors, and places in Kentucky. There's something for everybody. While you're here, if you like the channel, hit the subscribe button and the notification button so you get notified anytime new Kentucky history is available. And if you want to support the channel, we have a Patreon page as well, or patreon.com/kyhistorypod. You've probably heard about Daniel Boone, but what about the rest of the frontiersmen who came to Kentucky and settled? That's what we want to bring to the Kentucky History Channel. The stories of the untold, the stories of those forgotten. One thing to expect on our channel is great Kentucky content. Some stories that you've never heard of. The Night Riders, who began in western Kentucky. Bloody Monday, the riots in Louisville. The assassination of Governor Goebel, the only governor ever assassinated in the United States. Stories from all over Kentucky, stories that are unforgettable once you've heard them. You can find out who counties in Kentucky are named after and how your county got started. From beginning to end, we plan to document every county in Kentucky, all 120. Reach out to us on all of our social media platforms. Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and also leave a comment on one of our YouTube videos. You can also check out our podcast episodes. You can subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and many more. We're always seeking to find more Kentucky history so we can bring it to you. The viewers, the listeners, we want all the stories and all the events from Kentucky's great history to be told and shared everywhere.